All right, well, let's get going. Welcome. My name is JJ Smith. I'm the Director of Education for PIRA. We're glad that you are here joining us. Today, we get to hear from Eric DeWong from Michael Sullivan and Associates. He will be talking to us about navigating the new SB553 Workplace Violence Prevention Plan requirements. So excited to hear from Eric. Today's webinar is worth one PDC through SHRM and one California specific recertification credit through HRCI. So want to make sure you're aware of that. And also, within 48 hours after the webinar, you will receive your certificate of attendance with those credits. And you will also receive a recording of the presentation and a PDF of the presentation itself. And again, you will get that within 48 hours after the webinar ends. For those of you that are new to PIRA, we're so glad you're here. Our mission is to engage, elevate, and serve the California human resource community, and we do that through innovative programming, professional development, and high impact networking opportunities. So thanks for joining us. If you have any questions about becoming a member, please email membership@pira.org. Lily is available to assist you with that. She's our Director of Membership and is awesome. And if you have any questions about the events we do or programs, you can email me and Val at programs@pira.org. And as a reminder, all of our webinars, if you are a member, are free in 2024. So want to make sure that you remember that and encourage you to take advantage of it. Also, as a member, you have discounted pricing for our prep classes that we do for certification. These certification classes are offered to members and non-members. So we encourage you to check these out. All of our classes are done virtually. And the gentleman that leads them is Richard Dawson. He's amazing. We receive positive feedback from him, as an instructor all the time. And so we encourage you to check those out. And also want to remind you that as a member to take advantage of the PIRA workplace. It's powered by Mineral, and there's a phone number there to remind you, 855-306-6460. You can call that number anytime between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m. Pacific time to get live advice on some of the HR questions that you have. So an incredibly valuable resource for you. Just want to remind you that as a member, that's available to you. For those of you that are not members and are thinking about becoming a PIRA member, want to make sure you know that we have 18 chapters and special interest communities throughout Southern California. If you join a chapter, say you join the Riverside chapter because you work in Riverside, but you live in Los Angeles, you can attend any chapter meeting at any time. So just because you join a chapter does not mean that you are restricted to that chapter alone. We encourage networking. We encourage community at PIRA. So wanted to make sure that you're aware that anywhere you are in Southern California, we're here to serve you and that we hope you become a part of our community. Our home office has a couple things coming up. Two things I really want to bring your attention to. One is the April 25th HR Power Series event that's coming up. This is an in-person event. It takes place in the last half of the afternoon on Thursday, April 25th, and it's going to be phenomenal. It's a few hours of presentations from three amazing women who are going to be talking about how to be assertive with your voice, how to negotiate. Our final speaker is Heather Lachak, and she is the Chief People Officer for the Aerospace Corporation. Before that, she was at Mattel and Northrop Grumman. And then after we hear from these women, there's a time of networking and cocktails. So really encourage you to check out the HR Power Series. It's going to be a phenomenal event. And even though we're hearing from women only, it's not a women only event. Everyone is welcome to come. So I want to make sure that you're aware of that, and please join us. And then also the big announcement is that CAR is here, our annual conference. If you have not yet signed up for CAR, we encourage you to do so. Eric, our speaker today, will be speaking at CAR, and I'm sure he'll mention that when he chats, but really encourage you to attend CAR. It's really, in my opinion, one of the best events that PIRA does, a great opportunity to learn, grow professionally, and meet with others, and just be able to interact with those that understand the challenges that you face day to day. But let's get going. The reason you're here, Eric DeWam, Managing Partner of Michael Sullivan Associates. Eric, go ahead and take it away. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much, JJ. Welcome, everybody. Give me one moment while I switch presentations real quick. Once JJ pops this one off, I will put ours on. There we go. Hold on one second. And we are off. And as JJ was speaking, I did see a few on the chats that were coming in late asking about the presentation, if it'll be available, if it'll be recorded. The answers are yes, it will be recorded. Yes, we're going to give you a copy PDF of the presentation as well. So all of that will be available. As many of you know, I usually don't read through presentations, but all the material will be in there. We'll give you some links at the very end that I think will be very helpful for you. And you can always reach out to me directly as well. So let me move this real quick. Stand by. All right. So I already saw a lot of my Pyra colleagues out there. Of course, that's me. So welcome. A lot of familiar names. And for those who aren't part of Pyra, it is a fantastic organization. In addition to, I'm a trial attorney of 23 years, managing partner at Michael Sullivan Associates. But in my spare time, I also volunteer for Pyra for the College Relations Committee. And it's a group we have come together, a fantastic group that works with universities and colleges with the students who are interested in HR to give them the resources, give them mentorship, those types of things. So if you're out there and you're either a student or you're part of HR, you want a mentor or you want to be a mentor, reach out to us. And it's a really exciting time, and the students really appreciate it, and you really feel good about doing it when you do participate. We have 10 offices throughout California. I highlight here the Chat SOC because it's kind of like a Chat GPT, but it's a closed system for all of our books. And that is available, and they use it in an AI form. I bring it up because at CAR, that is what Tara Fournier, your Pyra president, and I will be presenting about the interaction between AI and HR. So it's May 20th through 21st. Our presentation is on the 21st. Please join me and my co-pilot, who I think is also out there. Hi, Tara. We'll also be doing a happy hour on the 21st. So if you're interested in that and RSVPing for the happy hour, all of my QR code, which I've been reduced to just a QR code now, all that information will be out there at the end, and you can reach out. Okay. So what are we going to talk about today? Everybody's heard since September about the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan. It comes through Cal OSHA. We have already dealt with new generation laws through Cal OSHA. Remember that thing, COVID, and the laws that were changing all the time, and we were maneuvering all the time and trying to put out fires. This came out in September, and people are still asking a lot of questions about it because it is a new generation type of law, and there's not been anything really quite like it before. So people are scrambling about, how do I do this? How do I communicate with employees? How do I make sure we've, checked all the boxes so we don't get in trouble with Cal OSHA? And I can, honestly, it really is hard to read in between the lines with the law itself, which is 640.1.9, SB553, interchangeable. I'll just say SB553 to be a little bit easier, but that's the code section. Lots of questions have come into Cal OSHA about it. And there's some resources that have come out. I'll have some QR codes for that as well that I think will be very helpful. We're going to walk through that together. Now, because we have a lot of material to go through, the way we'll do it today, normally I do questions on the fly as we go. I'm not exactly sure about timing for today because this is a new presentation. So we're going to wait until the end to get your questions. Please put them in the Q&A. JJ will be watching those. And if we have time at the end, we will talk about those questions and answer them as I can. And if we run short on time, you can always reach out to me, email. Everybody knows, I'm on LinkedIn and the gram and all that kind of stuff. So feel free to, slide in my DMs or email me, or however you want to do it to get more information. All right. So we're going to go through all of this, and we're going to break it down to make this as simple as possible. The reality is it's really not going to be that hard. What it's really going to take is some preparation and just understanding that all these new bells and whistles of communicating with employees and the training and the annual work you're going to have to do won't be that difficult once you take care of it the first time. My recommendation is going to be get on it now because as we'll learn, the timing is going to come really quickly of when we have already needed to get these things out, established, communicated with the employees, and trained. All right. So as we know, September 30th, this came out. Everybody was scrambling. There's been a lot of presentations on it that have been out there, but there's been some really important recent developments this last month. So if you saw one before this last month, then it's probably a little bit outdated and we have a little bit more information. So important to keep that in mind. We've gotten some new guidance from Cal OSHA and there's more coming in as well. So in effect, July 1st, 2024, what does that mean? Does that mean we have to have everything done by then, or we can start? Will it be a grace period? That is in one of the FAQs I'll get to a little bit later. As usual, Cal OSHA was incredibly vague about it, but that should not be a surprise. Employers that fall within the scope have to implement, maintain an effective workplace violence prevention plan. I go to a lot of conferences, and as I walk through these the different booths and that type of stuff, there's a lot of organizations that are out there charging you for these plans. And I'm not saying don't do that, but I think it's a lot easier to do than you might expect. And Cal OSHA has given some templates that I think are probably going to get you most of the way there with just a little bit of work. And we have to do this on our own anyway. So doing outsourcing to another company is not going to really get us out if it's done wrong as being responsible as the employer. So having most of my clients do these direct, and it's not necessarily one of those things that needs an attorney to draft for you if you're using the proper template from Cal OSHA. If you feel better about that, have your counsel take a look at it after to see if there's any suggestions to make sure you have a solid template. All right. What it must include. So some of these are going to be those times where I am going to read through because they're all important. And I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So it has to identify who's responsible for implementing the plan. What does implementing mean? We'll get to that in a second. Involving employees and their representatives. Representatives meaning typically unions. So if you have unions involved, they have to be part of this. I'll talk about some ideas of how to make that work. Accepting and responding to reports of workplace violence and prohibit employee retaliation. It's just like any other complaint procedure that we have. And we have these out there. We have, harassment complaint procedures. We have, safety complaint procedures. We just have to make sure that our policies are very clear that retaliation is not acceptable and it's protected under both state and federal law. And also making sure, of course, that our supervisors and managers really understand that and get the proper training for that. Communicating with employees regarding workplace violence matters, responding to actual and potential emergencies that will go into the plan. We'll talk about that. Developing and providing effective training, identifying, evaluating, and correcting workplace violence hazards as you find them, performing post-incident response investigation. All of these will break down a little bit because they make it sound really complicated, and it's really not. So we'll work on that. Plan has to be in writing, has to be easily accessible at all times to employees. So what does that mean? And we have everybody out there, because I know I have some construction people out there that I saw. I have people in all different forms in agriculture. We have all different forms of environments for our employees. So making it readily accessible, it's kind of like all of our postings that we have to have up there all the time anyway, from the CRD, from the EEOC, those posting areas. With this particular policy, a lot of my clients are doing just a binder that's available there that everybody has access to at all times if they're in office. So that's usually a good way to go. Putting it on a company website, if it's only accessible to employees, you can do that as well. What I worry about with that is when those things are down or not accessible in IT and they can't actually easily access it for whatever reason. So if you have a solid system, I think that's fine. Otherwise, a printed binder that's available to everybody, I think is a good way to go. has to have a standalone section for IPP. So you can have it in the IPP we already have, and it has to be a standalone section, or you have a separate section for this policy. I'm neutral on how to do that. If you want to make it part of your IPP, just make sure it's really clearly separate. If you're going to do that, you can do it. So it's entirely up to you. I think it's just a judgment call. Who does it apply to? All employers, employees, places of employment, and employees provided housing, except those listed in 6401.9, A through F. Let me just tell you about the ones that are probably most important for the exceptions. Otherwise, it's everybody. Healthcare facilities that are already under Cal OSHA's workplace violence healthcare standard. So what does that mean? And you might even have hybrid situations out there. So who is covered? Example here, skilled nursing, covered. Assisted living, not covered. And there might be hybrids in those situations. My suggestion is if you have these hybrid situations, make sure you're covering everybody, even if it's one employee that's outside of the Cal OSHA regular standards, just to make sure that you are covered. When there are fewer than 10 employees working at any given time, and that is not accessible to the public. So what does that mean? I get a lot of clients that say, hey, we have a bunch of employees, but most people work, remote. And maybe we just have groups come in quarterly for meetings. There might be 20 or 30 people that come in. So my response to that is that meeting sounds like to be at any given one time. That time counts. Now, if you only have 2 employees out there that are, then you might be okay. But remember, it's an and. It has to and not be accessible to the public. So what does that mean? If anybody can walk in from the street, and they don't really give a definition of this, but this is what I expect the interpretation will be. If anybody can walk in from the street and go into the office, it's accessible to the public, even if you're not considered open. If you have key cards and those types of things that only employees can get in, I think you're in good shape. That is not accessible. And if you have under 10 employees, I think that's okay. And you have to be in compliance with your IPP anyway, which everybody's in compliance with that. All right. What is workplace violence? What does that mean? This is what comes from Cal OSHA. Includes, but is not limited to. Don't we love that language? It just means everything else you can think of later, but we'll just give you a few examples. So includes, but is not limited to threat or use of physical force against an employee that results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, psychological trauma, or stress. So it doesn't have to be a physical injury. It can be a threat or an actual thing that gives them the stress or the worry that they could be in danger. An incident involving a threat or use of a firearm or dangerous weapon. What does that mean? So it doesn't have to actually be the weapon itself. It can be somebody threatening that they're going to hurt somebody with a weapon, even if that's not there at that moment in time. The threat alone counts as workplace violence. So what they've done is they have broken types of violence into 4 different categories you've probably all heard about. Even though we have these types of violence that I'm going to define here in a second, it seems to be more than just that. And I'll talk about that in a second, just by the FAQs that they have. There's more than just what is here on types of violence, but these are the ones they've broken it down to. Workplace violence is the type 1 is the workplace violence committed by a person who has no legitimate business at the work site, includes violent acts by anyone who enters the workplace or approaches workers with the intent to commit a crime. So that's anybody out in the public who can come into contact with our employees. That is the general type 1 that we're dealing with. Type 2, workplace violence directed at employees like customers, clients, patients, students, inmates, visitors. So anybody who can come into contact or hurt our employees that are invitees in any way, shape, and form. Students is another one for my school districts. There's some guidance on there as well. I'll get to that in a later slide because there was a lot of questions that went to Cal OSHA about that. Type 3, Workplace violence against an employee by a present or former employee, supervisor, or manager. So the disgruntled former employee coming in that's upset, getting mad at their manager, their supervisor, they were terminated. That's your type 3 type violence. Type 4, which is the last one, workplace violence committed in the workplace by a person who does not work there, but has or is known to have a personal relationship. The disgruntled spouse or the other relationships out there with our employees that could be coming into the workplace and causing issues. So what does it not include? It does not include self-defense. So if somebody is assaulting an employee, if they are protecting themselves, that employee who's protecting themselves is not committing workplace violence. They are simply in a self-defense mode. Now, this is where it's a little bit outside of these type 4 violence. If you look at the definitions, all of them talk about persons, right? But animal attacks also are included. So this is one of the questions that came out in the FAQ that Cal OSHA just recently answered. And give me one moment. Let's see what's going on here. There we go. So it said, workplace violence includes any act of violence or threat of violence that occurs in a place of employment. That includes animal attacks. So even though the definitions they have in those 4 talk about people, they say, well, people and animals. And, hey, I'm one of those people that thinks animals are people too, so I guess I'm okay with that. And they also have LC 6041.9, these subsections, that it says employers are required to document animal attacks. So what type it falls into, not entirely sure, but we know we have to document animal attacks as well. All right, the plan itself. What do they mean by saying establish, implement, and maintain a plan? So we have to have workplace safety related elements to this specific to every location. So one of the questions that came out was, hey, we have a large company, we have multiple locations. Can we just make this general plan for everybody? And that's the plan, wherever you're located. The answer from the FAQs was no. Every single one of these has to be designed for the specific area or environment. So if you have changing construction sites, you might need to alter that in a more frequent time. You have 3 months there, you go somewhere else, there might be other elements at that other place that you have to include in your plan and update it. If these are stationary locations for employees, it's going to be a little bit easier, but all of your offices might have different issues, different ways of getting in, different escape plans, fire safety issues. So one of the tools you probably want to utilize if you're in an office building are using those office building already created plans. They have the fire escape plans, they have other escape plans. Attaching it to your workplace violence prevention plan is a good way to go too. So you're being specific to that building, specific to that location. So you're satisfying that element. Example, what do they mean by implement? Completing inspections, hazards, assessments, having somebody go through going, hey, what kind of, issues do we have that are hazards here that we can be specific to this building? And we'll get into how we communicate with employees about that in a moment. Communicating with employees about it and definitely generally talking to employees and their union reps about ideas of how to get these out. Now, in checking these boxes, the way I like to think of this is in any other way that we do an interactive process with employees, because that's what we're really trying to do. And as everybody knows in the interactive process, it didn't happen unless you documented it. So when you're doing this, don't just have everybody come into a conference room and give me your ideas and that's it. Have some way you're documenting these ideas, documenting those exchanges with the employees. How are people doing it? Some are simply by office location as opposed to company-wide. Having those office supervisors, those people in charge of that location, sending out that email saying, hey, we've completed what we think is going to be our implemented plan. We want everybody to take a look at it. If you have other ideas, if you think there's something that's missing, those types of things, please direct it to an insert name, whoever's going to be the point person. So you're communicating with employees and they're sending in their ideas. I have some clients have said, hey, do I just do this mass email and just let everybody respond to the same thread? And the cynic that I am doing this for 23 years suggests there's always that employee out there who's going to have that ridiculous idea and they're not going to let go of it and create this terrible thread for you. So because of that, I would just encourage them to contact one person. It doesn't have to be a group setting where everybody's collaborating, just that you're giving them the opportunity and you have a document, that email, that they've communicated to you and you've responded to them of whether and how you're going to implement that, I think is a good way to go. Administrators that need to be identified. We need to figure out who is going to be responsible for things, actual people in the organization who are going to be responsible. I'll have some examples of what that could look like in the template we'll have in a little bit. Have to have names, job titles, responsibilities, their emails, their phone numbers, those types of things. Implementing the plan, each individual role must be clearly described in the plan. What does that mean? It could be the person who's responsible for training, or the CEO, the person responsible for approving the final workplace violence prevention plan. Those types of things I think are specific enough. The person who receives complaints, those types of things. All right. It has to describe, and if you have unions, describe how you're going to develop the plan with union and employee collaboration. So in your plan, I would insert in there that you've already sent out this information to the employees. They have the plan, the original template, and you've invited them and given them maybe 2 to 4 weeks to get back to you with ideas and how to do it better and what their ideas are, and see if you can implement those. I would document that in your plan itself, that was done, insert date of when this was done, and that you took all of the feedback and implemented those that were appropriate, is a good way to go. What does employee participation include? Identifying, evaluating, correcting workplace violence hazards, designing and implementing training, report and investigation incidents of workplace violence. That's all considered participation. All right. Coordinating it with employees. Plan has to include the method the employer will coordinate with the employees in the plan and other employees. Like I said, some of my clients are doing this by email. There are many other ways you can do it. There's a broad, because it's so open-ended, I think you can define different ways based on the employer of how you want to collaborate. I just want to get the message across that, one, you want to document it. And two, you don't necessarily want to create an environment that creates more problems than, like I said, there's always those employees that go outside of what we're trying to do and make it something different. So just be cognizant of that and make sure this collaboration is documented in emails or however you're going to do that in communication with employees. All right. Other employers and employees understand the roles of the plan. You're going to deal with that in the training as well. We'll talk about that. The training has to be a live training. We can't do online, because we have to have a collaborative rapport with the employees that are listening to the training. So when you do this, do it in a way that people can ask questions, in a way that we can get back to them, we can give them feedback, and if something needs to be tweaked for whatever reason, there's something that was forgotten, you can take care of that and document that. Now, I saw there's a bunch of questions and raised hands. Those who raised their hands, put the question in the chat, and I think we're going to have more time at the end. We'll start going through the questions as well. All right. The incident log. We now have a template incident log from Kalosha. So do we have to use that one from Kalosha? The answer is no. But why wouldn't we? Right? If we're ever called to the carpet to check our compliance, don't we want to say, hey, yeah, we're pretty darn compliant because we used your form and with very little changes. Now, the devil's advocate to that is Kalosha always puts more in than they're required to do. So you can truncate that as long as you're not taking out essential elements of the requirements under the WVPP. So I would use those elements. I would use that form itself and just curate it to your own company. That's where I would start. Can you use another form? Sure. Do you have an attorney who says, oh, no, use my form, that's fine. But I do like the idea of if there's ever an investigation that you're using their templates. Let's see. Log must be based on information solicited from employees. Log must exclude personal identifying information. So this is important. And remember when we were documenting issues with COVID and that type of stuff, we couldn't identify individual people. And that's the case here. So when you're looking at your log, and I'll have an example of the log we'll go through towards the end, just make sure you're not putting identifying information, right? And if it's somebody who, if you put, their title, everybody's going to know who that is. Find a way kind of around that to make it a little bit more vague. The smaller the organization, the harder that is. When we were dealing with COVID, people, we didn't give information out, but that one person who's wearing the mask around because, they'd been exposed and had to wear a mask for 10 days, it's kind of like the scarlet letter. So we kind of know what's happening. So just do your best to make sure it's not identifying information or easily knowledgeable with still filling in the blanks that CalOSHA requires. Like I said, you can have your own. School districts should document all incidents related to special education. Now, this comes from a question in the FAQs. And the question was generally, hey, we have special education students. And very often with special education students, there can be strikes or, lashing out, those types of things where a teacher or another student gets hurt or there's a threat of being hurt. Does that count? And the school district that was asking said, hey, because it's not intentional, right? This isn't an intentional issue. CalOSHA said, hey, it doesn't matter. Intent or not, you have to put these down every time. So especially when you have these situations where these happen pretty frequently, you have to have somebody who's really on it to fill out the incident log for these. And again, not putting identifying information, but satisfying that particular requirement. All right. Employers have employees working in and outside California. So we have employees in California, we have employees in New York, we have employees in Florida. What's our obligation? And the law itself didn't tell us, but they did in the FAQs suggest, hey, it's just for those employees that are going to be in California. And if it's an employee who regularly works in California, they might be based in New York, but they spend a week or two, a month in California. Make sure that they're in there as well, because they're regularly going to be in these spaces. Does it have to be completed before July 1st? This is where they were incredibly vague. It says they're in effect July 1st, 2024. Was their response? That includes training. So what does that mean? And part of the question was, is there a grace period? Right? We got everything right. If we do this on July 2nd, are we out of compliance? So what they're saying is everything should be done by July 1st. So that's not really your go date. Your go date, I would probably put at least a week before to capture anybody else that you need to train that didn't end up on the original training. So at least calendar your deadline for at least a week or two before. So once July 1st, you're like, hey, that's already done. That box was checked. So make sure that's the issue. And also that I would probably at this point, if you're going to start sending those emails out to get feedback, I would probably start doing that no later than May to get the feedback, get that moving. Even with the template, it's going to save you a lot of time when you see it. That's provided by CalOSHA. Even with that, I have a feeling it's going to take a lot of tweaks. We haven't done this before. This is relatively new. It is, I think considerably simple, but our first time around, it always takes some work and tweaking. So give yourself plenty of time. Record keeping. So the question was, well, what about Form 300? And this is where we understand that we have multiple forms we may need to be filling out, right? So we know our Cal Form 300. If it's work-related death, work-related injury, or illness that involves loss of consciousness, restricts work activity or job transfers, days away from work, or medical treatment beyond first aid, you have to put that in a Form 300. Now, if it doesn't have all of these, then it might just be in your workplace violence log, right? It doesn't have to meet all those bells and whistles for Form 300. But there might be times where it crosses over. So you have to fill out your Form 300 and your incident log for workplace violence. Must maintain the records. How long do we have to do this? Eric, it's, well, typically it's going to be for much of this, except for the training, 5 years. So for the training, we'll just talk about for the 1 year for the training. That means that you've had everybody come in, everybody's signed up, you have certifications that, you know, they've all taken it. You have it by training date, the contents of the, or summary of the training, which is simply, you know, whatever PowerPoint you've used, and you're probably using in your PowerPoint lots of the prevention plan. I think that's the easiest way to do it. Names and qualifications of the persons conducting the training, and names and job titles of the persons attending the training. Keep that for at least a year. But I mean, because we're gonna have to do this annually, maybe keep it a little bit longer. You know, we're dealing with first generation issues right now. So I'd probably keep them at least 2 years, even though it says 1. Violence incident log, 5 years. And records of workplace violence, also 5 years. Records of workplace violence cannot have medical information. So don't include, especially if it has something to do with, you know, exacerbated by some type of medications or that type of stuff. Don't put identifying medical information. It doesn't belong in the log itself, because these can be inspected not just by Cal OSHA, but upon request by employees. Now, this is where I think we're going to be dealing with something new regularly. We've all seen out there, I'm sure, and especially in the last 2 years, there is an onslaught of these letters that come out from these attorneys for employees that say, hey, we want all the personnel and wage records. We know that under the code, we have 21 days for the wage records, 30 days for the personnel file upon that request. Now, I really expect these plaintiffs' attorneys under every rock in California will say, hey, let's just add another one on there, because this involves, you know, sexual harassment. So I want to see if they're actually doing this right. I'm going to ask for their Cal OSHA incident log, and available for inspection within 15 days. So now you're going to probably have, with these template letters, they just copy and paste and send to every employer under the sun, the 15-day requirement, the 21-day requirement, and the 30-day requirement. So just keep an eye out on those. When you get those letters, and I know a lot of employers want to try and handle those themselves, this is just a separate and apart thought that I've seen on this. Plaintiffs' attorneys ask always for more than they're entitled to. That letter is going to have everything under the sun that they think that they want, but they're not entitled to. The window, the world in which they're entitled to is very narrow. So my recommendation is have your employment counsel look to those records before they're produced, because those demands typically are the precursor to the demand letter or, God forbid, the actual lawsuit. So you don't want to give them more than they're entitled to. Have those vetted, make sure you're giving them the bare minimum, make sure you're making the dates so there's no violation penalties. But I don't like employers to try and handle those typically themselves, because they very often they give everything. And once they come to me, they've already produced it, and it's emails and time records and all this kind of stuff that they didn't have to, and it's kind of opened another Pandora's box that they didn't need to. So give that some thought as well. Posting requirements. Where do you have these posted? Conspicuous place, like we talked about, easily accessible. Common areas, a big thing. For my construction, you know, where you typically have your postings, it has to be accessible, though, without them requesting. So, hey, I want to go into that office to take a look at it. They shouldn't have to ask to access these things. So it has to be readily accessible to these employees if they can just want to go and look at it on their own. And that's the posting and the WVPP. You don't have to implement a workplace violence reporting system for employees to be able to report anonymously. This is another question that came out in the FAQs. So we want to encourage and tell employees that, hey, this is a no retaliation zone. You're free to tell us. We want you to tell us. This is the person you tell. And there were some illusions in the law of whether they had to do it anonymously or not. You can do that, but you don't have to. So that's a judgment call also on your part. All right. Plans for employers with multiple job sites. I kind of talked about this already. Not surprising, I usually get ahead of myself. Does each work location need a dedicated plan? The answer is yes. So what you want to do is have whoever that office supervisor is, who's ever in charge of that location, understand this very well, and they're really in charge of that. Now, the training doesn't have to be by location. You can do a global training with referencing where to find the individual plans. So you don't have to have a training for every location. If you have, like we have 10 offices through California, we don't have to do training for every office. You can do a global training, and going through at least details that every location has their own building plans, own escape plans, own particular, issues that they deal with for safety. And as long as the WVPP itself is very specific on those, I think you're in good shape. All right. So Cal/OSHA just recently distributed some of this information that I've been getting a lot of these details from we've talked about already. I was actually relatively impressed because when we were waiting during COVID times for guidance, it was usually about 4 or 5 months where we were doing a lot of guessing and doing a lot of presentations of what we think they mean. But at least here we have a little bit more of a map. And I think it's a relatively good map for the most part. So what does this link have? And I'll have a QR code that will go directly to this link. It has educational materials. It has a model workplace violence prevention plan, which I suggest most employers use. It has fact sheets for both employers and employees that are available. And it has the FAQs. The FAQs are probably going to be updated on a regular basis. So I would just keep that on your tab, especially between now and July 1st. And I think that's going to populate. It's changed already a time or two. So keep an eye on the FAQs because they have really pointed questions and answers to navigate the law. This is what they kind of look like. Not kind of, but they actually look like. This is the employer fact sheet. So there's going to be a little box that you check. It says employer fact sheet. It's 3 pages. Not a lot of detail in that, so don't use that as your only resource, but it gets you started about what the requirements are. And then there's an employee fact sheet. So they can see all the ways that if you don't do it right, they can complain about it. So make sure that you also look at the employee fact sheet to know what they're looking at, to make sure you check all of those boxes. And if they're looking at like, yep, my employer did that. Yep, my employer did that, is a good way to go. This is the model WVPP. Now, for those who have not seen it yet, it is a fillable form, and I think pretty handy. And in that fillable form, you get to, where it's in red, you get to put in your own details and information. Now, you have to do this to your company, so they leave a lot of room for you to interpret for your own particular employees, the own particular, whatever building, construction site, whatever location you're at, school, etc. So there's a lot of red you're going to see here in a moment. I don't have the full WVPP here, but I want to go through a little bit of the detail to see what they're showing us. So another thing I'm trying to do here is, let's see. I'm going to try this new thing where I magnify, because if you're like me, you can't see these either. So let's see if I can get this. There we go. And there we are. So these are some examples of the fillable parts of the form. It says include procedures for what forms to use and how to document the corrective action. You're going to talk about, the incident log, those forms, who to report to, those types of things. How much detail do you have to put in this? It's a judgment call, but you don't have to put nearly as much detail as you're seeing that Cal/OSHA does. Of course, they go a little bit overbroad, but they do give you some examples here of corrective measures you can make. Improve lighting in a workplace, hire security guards if there's been frequent break-ins or robberies, install security surveillance. Those types of things, if you don't already have them, are ways that you can implement. If you do make these changes, as you approach the training and you've spent the money to do it, I would include that. Hey, we've looked at some of these hazards. These are some of the things that we have also installed to make sure you're protected. List those things that you have. So they see that you're doing active work on it. Let's see. Making sure employees have access to proper telephone numbers. Especially if you're in a building, utilizing building security numbers as well is a good way to go. Fire department access, all those types of emergency access numbers. This is a good place to have all of that right there. Even if you have it in a posting separately, I would bring that in here so it's accessible in one document is a good way to go. Okay, another page I wanted to go over real quick. Let's see if I can get that magnifier to work again. There we go. All right. So this is part of the incident log. So I would use this incident log. It gives you some details of how to fill it out. Location of incident. So you put the location in, workplace violence, type. And when they say type, that's what they mean, the 1, 2, 3, or 4. There's times where it can be more than one of these types. So include all types in there. And then there's going to be a section where you can get into more detail. When they say, so workplace violence type is different than incident type. Workplace violence type is the 1, 2, 3, 4. Incident type goes into more detail. And it says here in the notes on the system, on the form itself, for this part, you have to give the type of incident specifically refers to the nature, characterization. Is it a physical attack? Is it an animal attack? Is it a sexual assault? Those types of things. Now, because we're getting into these details, one of the questions that I imagine some are having is, well, what do we do when there's a claim of sexual harassment, sexual assault? Does that go in here? And I think the answer is yes. If there's a claim about that, especially a touching, any type of touching like that, that could fall into workplace violence, I think you give some brief information in here. And if it's not yet determined and you're investigating it, I would put in that it's alleged and that you're investigating, and I would put the steps in that you did to investigate. And if it's a non-substantiated one, I would put that in as well, if that is the case. All right, here is another one for the fillable portion. Consequences of the incident, including but not limited to whether security or law enforcement was contacted, those types of things. This is where you'd put in, did we, call 911? Did we use building security? Did they investigate? And was there an issue there? So showing what the steps were taken to correct the issue. And if it's an investigation issue that you had to, it was an allegation of violence. Allegation alone is enough. I would put in here as well, investigation, talk to witnesses, don't identify the witnesses, developed a conclusion and put whatever that conclusion is and what you did. If somebody was discharged for it, if an issue was corrected, I would put that in here. But remember, we can't have any identifying information in these. All right. This is where you get all the people who are going to be responsible for this and their direct information. So make sure they understand that they are responsible. HR, of course, you're going to have some part in this. You have a part in everything. That's what you do. So this is just some examples that they gave in the Cal OSHA template for the Workplace Violence Prevention Plan. The CEO, like I said, overall responsibility for the plan. HR manager for employee involvement, training, those types of things. Security manager, I would put security management as well. If you have outside security guards or a security company, I would put their information there as well in this spot. All right. And there we go. Emergency response procedures. I think this is really important as well. They give you a lot of areas to fill in yourself, identifying alarms, identifying security, identifying what surveillance you have. I would also make sure a lot of times when I get to a case, there's been an issue that probably should have been caught on video. And many people have those surveillance systems that record over themselves unless somebody goes in and pulls the recording itself, sometimes within as early as 30 days, sometimes earlier. So I would make sure that you're grabbing those videos in real time, indicate that that is part of your policy. And whoever is in charge of that, make sure that they grab those snippets. If there's an allegation, those video logs, I would hold on to those for a period of time. Even if nothing comes of this at all, save those videos. Very often when things like this, and I can imagine how some of these incident logs can be later referenced in a lawsuit for discrimination, harassment, those types of things. We often get asked for video. And sometimes it turns out, well, we had the video, but nothing happened with it, so we got rid of it. And that creates a problem for your litigator because there's evidentiary sanctions that can go with that. So make sure you're having a place where you save these things. Even if you've investigated it and nothing is really shown, I would still hold on to it for at least a period of 2 years to be relatively safe, because these can be filed later than when they've reported. And sometimes, well, usually it happens after they've already left or been discharged. So keep those in mind as well, just from a strategy point of view. And I think I'm good there. Let's see. And one more, I think I wanted to pull, and there are a lot more pages in this. So I encourage you to go and look yourself and pull these. I just wanted to pull the ones that I thought were maybe more helpful to just take a look at so you know what you're getting into. Review all supplemented reports, concerns, or potential. This could be from the system for the employer that has implemented for employees and authorizes employees and representatives anonymously. So if you have an anonymous situation, you're requiring that. That's where this goes. They can do it anonymously or they can report it. I'm on the fence of whether we do anonymous or not. But I have employers that say, hey, I just want to be extra safe because Cal OSHA put that in their template. We're just going to use that. That's entirely fine. And periodic inspections. So a few of the things that you want to do is periodic inspections of making sure your workplace violence prevention plan is up to date. We know we have to train once a year. It's one of those things. We have the calendaring for our sexual harassment training. We have the calendaring for our supervisor training and individual trainings. This is another one to add to your calendar so it doesn't slip by, especially because this is very new. I would put something on calendar for next year already of update the workplace violence prevention plan in May, do the 2025 training in June and get that out of the way. So employees start getting used to this rhythm. I don't think this law is going anywhere. If anything, it's going to be modified, tailored, and there'll be more requirements. So figuring it out now is a good way to go. Responding to the incidents. What employers should do when employees injured? Well, this crosses over obviously into workers' comp. If there's an employee that has an industrial injury and we know it happened in work, I think that triggers giving a claim form. Now, saying that, the requirement for providing a claim form in workers' comp is a very high one. Now, it's in employment law, usually the standards are pretty low. In workers' comp, providing a claim form is only when you know in fact. You have actual knowledge, not should know or anything like that. You actually know that it was a work-related incident. In those situations, and for a lot of these, it's probably going to be a claim form in that moment. So providing those. So giving notice of workers' compensation claims and other available resources. Record required information about the violent incident in the employee's incident log and in the Form 300 if it applies. So What do we do in response? Also, review the effectiveness of the written workplace violence prevention plan. If something wasn't in there, something happened, we forgot it, we can update in that moment, say, hey, we didn't think about this. We didn't even consider that this particular issue could happen, and that's probably very possible. An update after, I think that update of the WPV in that moment shows the work if you do it, and reporting all serious injuries that we already talked about and workers' comp injuries. Now, these are my QR codes for you because I thought it might be easier than just showing you a hyperlink. Those looking at this, you should be able to use your phone to take a look at these QR codes. This goes to the FAQ page, the first one. The second one goes to the model written program. There are many other resources, those fact sheets, stuff like that in there as well. But I think these are going to be the most important for you. That is, for those who know, I also have a podcast in my also spare time. So we do a monthly podcast where we talk about the updated laws, what's new in the employment law world, those types of things. I typically have guests. This month I have Pyra CEO, Raphael, is joining me, and one of our presenters, Stacey Gordon, is going to join me as well this month. So you can check that out. And if you have any questions, that is the 916 number is actually my phone number, my cell phone number. So you can use my cell phone anytime. And that QR code goes to everything in my life, my blood type, my DNA sequencing, everything is in there. So you can get anything from that QR. And I think we have time for questions. So I'm going to leave it to JJ because I saw a whole bunch of stuff going on during the presentation. So JJ, why don't you pick out some questions you think are good for closing?
Absolutely. I'm actually also going to ask Megan, are you able to unmute yourself? I see that you've been responding to a lot of questions, which has been awesome and helpful.
Yeah, you bet. So I'm happy to address a couple of these, especially some that were real consistent. There was a lot being asked around training. So I know at some point, Eric, you addressed and used the term global training. A lot of folks are wondering about remote workers. Can we do one training for people in office and outside of office? And what are the recommendations? Let's say we get everybody trained prior to the effective date. What going forward would be a fair expectation for training new hires?
Good question. And thank you, Megan. Megan's from my team, and I appreciate you looking out. Megan, I appreciate it. So the first one is a really good question. And sorry I didn't address that earlier because it is one of the more primary questions. It's the remote worker. Hey, we're in a new age, Eric. So we do have offices, but most of all of our employees are remote. Now, if you are in a situation where all of your employees are always remote and they never come in, then you're probably in that exception category. If you're in a situation where these remote employees could at any time be brought in to the workplace at any given time, those remote employees also need the training. So unless they are never coming in to the workplace, there's never any forecast that they ever will. And in that case, I don't think they need the training. But for those who could be, like those quarterly meetings, or the supervisor says, hey, we have this issue. I want everybody here to talk about it. Come in, next week. Even though that they're typically remote, they will need the training as well. So I would be over-inclusive, especially this first time around, because there is not a lot of guidance on that particular issue, of course, with the FAQs. So I would have even the remote employees, and the remote employees know if they come in, what office they're assigned to, especially if you have multiple offices. And for example, we have 10 through California. We have multiple remote employees. They're assigned to a particular office, making sure they understand that their particular workplace violence prevention plan and where that is located. Can they also get an email of it? Absolutely. You can do that as well. But I also letting them know where it's accessible when they do come into the office, if at all, is I think really important. What was the latter part of that question, Megan?
Sure. They were wondering, once, let's say they get everybody trained up by the implementation date, what's a recommendation on a go forward basis for new hires?
So it's the only requirement is once a year and then yearly after that. So even when you have new hires, if you've trained everybody on June 30th, you've already made the requirement. You get people coming in, 2 weeks later. I would still, as part of the onboarding process, and we have onboarding process, we talk about sexual harassment, we talk about trainings, that type of stuff. Because the requirement for this training is an interactive training, I think it's okay to wait until the next training, still giving them the workplace violence prevention policy. So one is the policy, make sure they have it, they know where it is when they come up, they're onboarded. The other is the training. The training, I think, is just once a year. So I don't think you have to do training every time you get a new employee.
Perfect. We also had a question about posting of information. Would you recommend, an employee center like ADP or a platform like that to post these sorts of things too? And would that constitute posting?
Yeah, so we use things like ADP, and we'll use that as an example. It's a great resource, especially for remote employees and they're clocking in and stuff like that. There's a part of it where you can look at all of the FMLA posters, the CRD posters, all of that type of stuff. Is that, would I include that in that portal as well? I would. With the way they've defined readily accessible, as long as we are confident that is readily accessible, I think that is fine as well. If you have physical locations in addition to that, I would still have the printed version there in a binder on a posting at the physical locations as well. But I think posting in those portals is a good way to go.
Okay, great. And then one that I'm going to kind of generalize, because there was a lot of folks with like specific questions to their, particular lines of work. But for anybody that has employees that work off site, things like construction sites, they are courier drivers, anything where technically the work site is constantly changing. They may be at one job site one day and a totally different one the next day. How do they go about addressing hazards, not knowing what they would be for each location?
So especially when they're traveling, they are all included. And the FAQs suggested that people who are transporting vans, delivery, rideshare, all of those are included, and it is specific to their employment. So the vehicles they use, the locations they go to, those types of things. Do you have to include if they're, a FedEx driver, every location they're going to of, a safety issue? No. But you have to address particular safety issues for those delivery drivers, those rideshare drivers. What do they do in emergency situations? Who do they contact? What are the resources? So on those mobile type of employees, yes, that matters where they go, because the caveat to that is even though we don't deal with remote employees if they're fully remote, that's because of the line that says as long as the employer doesn't have control over that. In those situations, the employer does have control because they're sending you out. So you do have to include them.
Okay. And as far as describing the nature of the hazards, should they err towards being generic, or how do they describe hazards when they're not familiar with the nature of the locations where their employees will be working?
You have to do a little bit of investigation. This is where the communication comes in, is talking to those employees that are on those places. What kind of hazards do you see? What are the issues you see? What can you tell us, because we're at a remote place and you're on the ground? What do you see, and create that, and then for whatever they've given feedback, use that as your specifics, would be my recommendation.
There were also some questions about minimum number of workers. So we have, this kind of question around the minimum threshold of 10, but what happens if the 10 aren't all reporting to the same work site? Or what happens if they have 10 workers, but technically, they are not open to the public and doors are locked. So is it more of a one or the other, or is it that an and they all have to be satisfied?
It's an and. So with the 10 requirement, as long as you're sure 10 people at that location will never, ever be there, then you're probably under the threshold. And on top of it, it's not accessible to the public. So you have to satisfy the 10, and if you have 2, not accessible to the public. So if it's locked and only those 2 or 3 employees can get in, you've satisfied both. If you have under 10 and it is accessible to the public, you've only satisfied 1.
Great. So I want to be mindful of time. Eric, you let me know if you have time for a few more questions or if we need to wrap it up.
Let's for the rest of the questions, and if there's a bunch, please just reach out to us and feel free to email me. Like I said, you can use LinkedIn or Instagram, whatever you want to do. I'll answer those questions. I think I'll have a script of the questions as well. So if I see any that are really something I missed that I wanted to include, I'll have JJ send that in the blast with the copy of the PowerPoint.
Awesome. Eric, thank you, thank you, thank you. Wow,
My
such
pleasure.
rich information. Love your expertise and just really appreciate you taking the time. And Megan, thank you for hopping in here and helping with the questions. It was really helpful. Appreciate you both. Hope everyone enjoyed this time. Don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you may have. We're here to serve you and hope you have a great day. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.